this tutorial, we are going to cover the SQL collaboration with ACM. Here's some important notes before we start. ACM and SQL collaboration thinks in one direction, and that is from SQL to ACM. ACM does not have the ability to update SQL databases. Each collaboration can think with one SQL server. ACM allows multiple collaborations with multiple SQL databases. A very important point here is to mention that if you're doing that, make sure that you have a unique identifier across all your databases. Otherwise, you will create duplicate data in ACM. So any identity record created directly in ACM is not affected by the SQL collaboration. Let's take a look at some of the prerequisites. So you should have this accomplished or this task completed before you try to create a SQL collaboration in ACM. So you need to engage the IT department of the end user to acquire the following information. So the SQL server name or IP address, a valid username and password that will give you enough permission to connect to that database and bring the information from that SQL database into ACM. So when you create your collaboration, you also should verify in the appliance under the About screen if you have a SQL collaboration added to the list of features in your ACM system. So here's some of the information that you want to ask the IT department to provide you. So again, is the SQL server address or IP address, the port number where the SQL server is listening for that connection, a valid username and password to access that SQL and that database that you're looking for to connect to. And also on the SQL database side, you need to know what is the fields that you want in that particular database or table that you want to import into ACM. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look on how this is accomplished in ACM. So we're going to go and create a configuration there. Okay, now that I'm logged into ACM, I'm going to go ahead and take a look under the appliance. Let's see what I have in my license. Make sure that I have that information ready there. It is. So you go to About screen, check what version you're running. You should be running the latest version of ACM. If you have any questions, you can contact tech support or just go to our website under the support section. You should be able to find the updates, downloads and updates for ACM in there. So what I'm looking for right now is this license right here. So I do have an SQL Server Pool license. So this will allow me to connect to that, to create a connection for SQL collaboration. So we're good here. All right, so let's go now and take a look in a collaboration. So I'm gonna go here, go to collaborations, and I'm going to create a collaboration with, I have an application here from HID called Assure ID. This application creates badge designs, and you can have its own database, so you can go and enter people, you can enter identities and enter their name, all their basic information and photos and so on. So what I'm going to do is create this collaboration, which is already created here, but we're going to create it again, where I can go and just import the data from that application directly into ACM with the photos and everything else. So let's go ahead and take a look. So first step you want to do is this. Again, you need to know the information of your database, right, or of your SQL database. So I'm going to go ahead and click in New Collaboration. You want to give that a name. Assure ID collaboration, and then you go here and say and select SQL collaboration, and that's going to open this screen, right, where you enter the IP address, the port number, a valid username and password. And once you do that, now the database is a connection successful. The database will show in this drop down. I'm gonna cancel here because I already have that created, so I want to show you how that looks like. So here it is. Okay, so here's this is my local SQL server where I have a Shure ID database in it. Here is the port number this is by default. I haven't changed any defaults in SQL, so that's by default the port that you can utilize, 1433, and then a valid username and password. So once you do that and you save, you have to save this first, and then you come back to here, and now you can drop this down and see the databases that are there, right? So I'm just gonna select a Shure ID, and now you can move this through the tabs. So the first tab here is the schedule. So here's where you can go and set the schedule to run in any X amount of seconds, minutes, hours, or days, right? And you can, if you want to automate that process, you can run this every hour or every whatever amount of data you bring it in. So the customer has to run that first and see how long it takes, and then based on that, you would go and set this accordingly. Okay, and you can always run it manually. So you can go in and click at any given time. If you need to import some data, you can just go and press it, and it runs right at that moment. And then you start to link the informations you're looking for. So for example, in identities, you go here and you add all the necessary information. So first you need to select the table. So now I'm connected to that Shure ID database. Under that database, those are all the tables that are reside in that database. I know that in this case, my information is set in this table called basic. And then all you have to do after that is just map the field. So when I created my Shure ID, I basically named it the same way it was in ACM. So I have a multitude of fields in here, and all you have to do is just set the fields. If you're doing any other database, if you remember in the prerequisites, I said that make sure that you map with the fields that you want to bring in from this SQL database into ACM. Because when you get to this step, you're going to need to establish the relationship. So what is the field in ACM, in the SQL database that you need to associate with the fields in ACM? So that goes for identities. If you bring in tokens, it's gonna work the same exactly way. You just gotta go pick the table and then add the fields that you're looking for, okay? Blob is basically an image. This one I do have it correct, I have associated, so here's my table is the same basic. Here's the photo where the photo resides in the Shure ID, in this case in the SQL, is in this field. And then the unique identifier, so I'm sure that I'm bringing information in, is here. If you have any user-defined fields, they will show in here. So you have to create the user-defined fields first, and then you can come in associated with that. So if you look here in mine, I have this license plate and emergency contact fields that I've created. I could go in here and now associate that with other information or with other fields in SQL Server. Okay. So once you do that, now you're ready to run it. So I'm going to stop here and go into the application. I'm going to show you first my identities. Let's go ahead and hit search. You'll see I have just test in case. So here's all the identities I have in my system. So now I'm going to switch to the Shure ID application. Let's go ahead and create a record here in this application. Again, just consider this as being any SQL database. In this case, it's called Shure ID. I'm going to add some record to the database, and with that record, we'll be able to go back into ACM and just synchronize that. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a new record here. I'm going to pick a photo. Let's add Mr. Mickey Mouse. So this application is just give you the ability to manipulate photos and other things and add them as a credential to someone. So just pick that. So last name, let's go ahead and add the record there. And you can have, if you have an ID, whatever the fields you have in this in this application, right? So I'm just adding a couple of fields in here, and once we're done with that, we're just going to synchronize that So here are all the fields. Notice that I've created some other fields in here that will help you to enter the field. So for example, status, if you're creating a new record, it should always be in 1. So you should have a field that says status 1. So that means the person is active in the system. Last updated, this is just tell me when this record was last updated. And then I have a photo type called JPEG. So when you synchronize in photos, you will need to enter that. So I enter that as a default, so it calls JPEG. So the system understands that I'm bringing in a JPEG photo into ACM. And that's pretty much it. Any other fields? I do have a few more fields in here. You can add it as user-defined fields if you want to enter that. So let's go ahead and do license plate so you you have an idea of a license plate and whatever that is, right? Or whatever other fields you have. This will be a unique field, right? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and save that record. And now we're gonna go back to ACM and run the replication. Okay, now we're back in ACM. Let's go ahead and go to collaboration. Here's our collaboration. I'm gonna go and run a preview first. This is to make sure that my collaboration configuration is correct. It won't change anything in the system, won't bring any data. It's just, again, it's just a preview. And because I only have one record, it's gonna run very quickly and already finished. So what you wanna look for when you do this is come down here below and look for anything that shows error, right? And so in this case, there is no error, so we are good to go. So the collaboration seems to be running correctly. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit back, go back to the collaboration, and now go ahead and run it effectively. So click in run. Before I do that, just to clarify, so I can run manually over here, or I can go in Assure ID configuration and schedule that to run periodically, right? So again, pick the time, the proper amount of time to run, either in hour or minutes, hours, days, whatever you need to do. So let's go ahead and run that. And is going to run again. Just because I have one record, it runs very quickly. So this is done already. So let's take a look under the identities. If everything went fine, we should have a new record. I had 12 records before, now I have 13. So great, that means one record came in. And here is Mickey Mouse. Let's click on that. And that's gonna show me, here's the photo that we picked Mickey Mouse. Here's all the fields that we've selected, right? So they're here. Here's the name, address, and email address, and everything else. The other fields here I didn't pick, but you get the idea. So it's whatever fields you associate in the collaboration, they will show up over here, including user-defined fields. You can have them here too, right? So if you link them properly, I haven't linked them in my collaboration, but if you do link, they will show up over here. It could be any amount of user-defined fields. Okay, so again, here's how simple it is to create a collaboration with SQL database. That's it for now.